Hello everyone, this is Lala, and today I'm going to be ranking the Era 2 men, meaning the people who debuted in the Era 2 that have done at least 3 seasons on the Challenge franchise. So I did this for the Era 1 2 men, women, the Era 2 women, and I'm going to do this for the Era 3 and 4 men and women. So there are a few things that I definitely have to take into consideration when it comes to ranking the Era 2 men, especially because a lot of the people who played in this era mainly played during the Era 2 seasons primarily. So they haven't played in a decade or a decade and a half, and due to that, it's not the most fair to compare them to people who have continued playing from the time they debuted in Era 2 all the way to modern times, where some people are just so insular to that era. I also have to take into the fact that a lot of the Era 2 seasons were big team seasons. It's nowhere near as much as the Era 1 seasons, and we do see some individual seasons and a few more pair seasons here. So it's a bit more balanced and easy to compare to latter eras compared to Era 1. But I am going to go through the official categories, and just from looking at it here, there's not as many Era 2 men that did at least 3 seasons compared to the Era 1 men, but I do think that a lot of the Era 2 men did more seasons compared to the Era 1 men. Though I do think All Stars kind of balanced it out, but yeah, let's just get to it. So, the first major category that I am considering when it comes to this ranking are the competitions. So, this refers to the dailies, though not nearly as much because I just don't feel like it. And they're not the easiest to really look into. Eliminations and final performances. So, the more early boots someone has, the lower they are on the list. Because obviously, if you're an early boot, you didn't do well on the season. If you are consistently an early boot, it means that you consistently do not last long on the challenge, and it means that you are consistently not a good player. That should be pretty self-explanatory. So the next thing that I am looking into are final wins, final reach, and close to the final. So final wins, that refers to the amount of finals someone won. The finals reach means the amount of finals that someone made. So let's just say someone has one win, so that would be one finals win, and they made it to 6 finals. So they would have won 1 out of 6 finals. So if you have a lot of finals reach and little final wins, that's something that will probably cause you to be lower on the list. And the other element is someone who is close to the final. So I've stated this in the prior videos, and I'll state it in this one and the future videos. I consider this to be someone who's booted in the final 2 eliminations of their gender to be someone who made it close to the final. If you have a lot of close to the finals, but not many finals reached, that is something that I will have to heavily consider, and you'll be lower on the list compared to people who made it to a lot of finals, and especially if they won a lot of finals. But they'll be higher too. They'll be higher than people who never made it even close to a final, much less a final. So that's an element there that I am looking into. Another thing that I am taking into effect is that team challenges inflate daily wins. So seasons that have team formats, especially large team formats, will have your daily numbers inflated because you could win a challenge based on the team that you are on, even if you yourself didn't do well in that challenge or you didn't even partake in the challenge. This shouldn't be as much of a factor with the Era 2 man as it would have been with the Era 1 man, because there are less team challenges here, though there's still a decent amount, especially compared to the Era 3 and the Era 4 debuts that I will get into when I cover them eventually. Obviously, if you have a bad elimination record, you are going to be lower on the list, since it means that you cannot save yourself more often than not. And the fact that you are in elimination shows that something's wrong with your game, and if you can't pull out that clutch win, it means that you're going to be going home earlier than not, more often than not. So that should be pretty self-explanatory. And I already kind of touched on this last part, but if you lose a lot of finals, or if you miss a lot of finals, meaning you don't get to the final, or you consistently not getting close to a final, you obviously will be lower on the list, since it means that you're not a winner and you consistently can't even get close to the win. And that means there's some flaw somewhere with your game that needs to be looked into and taken to task. The second category that I am heavily considering when it comes to ranking these men is longevity. So this refers to the amount of seasons that they did, the wide bracket of years that they spent competing on the show. So if you competed on less seasons, chances are you will be lower on the list. So for an example, if you only did 3 or 4 seasons, with 3 seasons being the minimum to make it onto this list, you'll probably be lower on the list just due to the fact that your sample size is just so small compared to many of the other guys who competed in twice, thrice, or even 4 times as many seasons. The only way that someone who did like 3 or 4 seasons would be really high is if their seasons are really strong seasons and they played perfect games on those seasons compared to people who did more seasons and are more flawed. But that usually doesn't happen just from my experience when it comes to these rankings. Another element that I am looking into is if you did your seasons only in a few year time frame, you're going to be lower on the list more likely than not. Because the challenge is a show that has lasted for over 2.5 decades at this point, and with people on the earlier eras having more chances to compete not only on the flagship show but on spin-offs. If you have success during your initial run or your younger run, and you're continuing to have success in your older run or in your more recent run, it shows longevity in your skill set and your success on the show, where if you only had success during a few year time frame, it means that you didn't hold up as well, whether it's due to you not doing the show afterwards or just flopping in your more recent seasons and appearances. So that's something that I definitely have to look forward to, since I feel like someone who's consistently successful throughout years is better than someone who only did it in a few year time frame. Obviously, due to this, if you did more seasons, chances are you're going to be higher on the list. Because you're on more seasons, you have more chances to do many different formats to see how good of a challenger you are. And if you're on more seasons, the time span that you spent on the show will most likely be longer. So it'll be able to see how well your skill set and your performances aged or not, based on you doing more seasons in different time frames as well. So that's something that I am looking forward to. And with that in mind, if you have many successful years or seasons done throughout many different years and decades, you're going to be a lot higher on the list, since you were able to adapt to the changing times, the changing formats, the changing casts as well. Because some of these people did seasons that mainly had their friends and their co-workers on, meaning the people that they debuted with, but they didn't really do anything different, and they're so insular to that time frame. So if you're able to break out of that and still have success, you'll be higher on the list. The third category that I am heavily looking into are the eras and formats. I don't think this will be as big of a deal compared to Era 1, because we do have some seasons in Era 2 that are more pair and individual. There's no janky formats like the first 4 seasons of Era 1, or even a Battle of the Sexes or Battle of the Seasons, where there are no eliminations but vote outs. We don't have any of that here, with the exception of the island. So I think things will be a bit more balanced when it comes to the Era 2 end. Anyways, this doesn't fit here, but seasons and eras with no eliminations will be lower on the list. This is mainly in reference to the island and nothing else from Era 2 onward, so that shouldn't be a big concern here. We had individual seasons that debuted on this season, and like I mentioned in the other videos, success in duo/pair or individual seasons will be higher on the list, since it means that your chances of getting to the final and winning are a lot smaller, because more people and pairs are going home, or individuals are going home, and it really shows the best of the best. So seasons that had vote-offs, so like the island, or where mostly everyone goes to the finals, will be lower on the list, since obviously less people go home, your chances of making it to the end are higher, and even your individual strengths aren't as emphasized on seasons like this, so that's something that I am considering. Despite there being some improvement when it comes to the Era 2 seasons regarding the format, there's still a lot of seasons in this era that had large team seasons that didn't have many eliminations and had a lot of people making it to the final and a lot of people winning. So these seasons will be lower on the list due to the reasons that I've kind of mentioned earlier. More people winning and more people going to the final means that there are more spots, two people to make it far, and it means less eliminations taking place, and it's easier to have more success in these seasons, and you can easily hide behind other people. Also, if you played on modern seasons, which are longer filming wise and have harder format and harder dailies and harder eliminations, you're going to be higher on the list, especially if you debuted on Era 2, because it means that you were able to continue your success throughout a longer period of time. So this final category is going to be kind of just like a blimp in my mentions when it comes to some of these players is the politics. So this refers to the alliances that they were in during their seasons, whatever political moves that they made to help themselves get or stay successful, and avoiding eliminations in seasons due to politics, since that is a factor with a decent amount of people here and just on any era, especially on formats where you don't have to go into elimination to make it to the final and win. So that is also a strength there, and I believe that's it when it comes to my qualifications. So at dead last at 19th place is Vinny Foti, who played on Fresh Meat 2, Cutthroat, and Battle of the X's 1. So this one was a very easy choice for me, but I do find it interesting when people mention the worst man of Era 2, his name never comes up, despite his very poor record, though I think a part of this is due to people just finding him to be very forgettable. He was the second boot with Sarah on Fresh Meat 2 due to losing Excel against Kenny and Laurel. On Cutthroat, he had an early season boot here, just not the first two boots according to the criteria on my list, where he was the third man booted, losing in elimination to Eric, and this was because they saw him as weak. And then on his final season, despite winning the second daily and having a decent chance of doing well in the season, he decided to rip off Mandy's top off, causing himself and Sarah to be DQ'd. He's never made it past the third boot on any season, and he only did 3 seasons, so this one was an easy choice for last, despite others being more notable at sucking. At 18th is Tyri Ballard, who competed on the Inferno 3, the Gauntlet 3, the Island, Rivals 1, Battle of the X's 1, Rivals 2, and All Stars 4. Honestly, I am kind of shocked that he's not dead last out of the Era 2 men, and it's mainly because I forgot about Vinny. Tyri's first season was the Inferno 3, where he ended up being the first boost on the season, as he was taken out by Alton in the first guy's elimination. It seemed like he could have had a chance on the Gauntlet 3, where he maybe had the best chance of making it somewhat far, but he ended up quitting the game due to his girlfriend having some sort of family emergency, and quitting early in the season. The Island is another season where he didn't do well on at all, but it's the only season where he made it to the halfway point of the season. But due to being a weak competitor and not being in the main alliance, he was taken out after losing a face-off to Evelyn and a vote to Dan. He returned a few years later on Rivals 1, where he was paired up with Davis, and they ended up being the first boot due to losing in elimination to Kenny and Wes, where they're intentionally thrown in to give Kenny and Wes a chance to survive, since they were automatically in due to getting last. Being partnered with Jasmine on Battle of the X's 1 was a recipe for a disaster, and not because she punched him on the season, or not just because of that, where they got last place on the 4th daily, causing them to lose to Anissa and Rachel, the only woman-woman pair on the season. His final flagship season was Rivals 2, where he was paired up with Dunbar, and they were put into the first elimination, where they did lose to Derek and Rob. People were looking forward to his comeback on All Stars 4, since it has been over a decade since his last season, or just a decade, but he ended up getting booted first yet again to Steve, even though the elimination was close. He's almost always the first boot on a season, and is someone that's consistently bad, who never won the season or even came close to winning. Unlike Vinny, he made it past the first 3 boots on at least a few seasons, so that's one of the reasons why he is higher. But his elimination record of 0-6 or whatever is horrendous. At 17th is Danny Jamieson, who competed on Fresh Meat 1, The Inferno 3, The Gauntlet 3, The Ruins, Fresh Meat 2, and Battle of the Seasons 2. He is also one of the 2 men, especially from this era, that is always seen as the worst male challenger, and it's pretty fitting. His first season was on Fresh Meat 1, where the real-world Austin were immediate targets, where Evelyn couldn't help him at all, where they were the first boot on the season against Wes and Casey. With the second season of his being the Inferno 3, he was on the Badasses team, but he didn't have a good run at all, where he was eliminated on the second male elimination on the season, continuing his poor streak on the show, losing to Davis. Ultimately, his best season, though it really doesn't say much, is on the Gauntlet 3, where he was part on the stacked veterans team and they dominated the season. It's the only season where he got far on, but he was caught trying to make a deal with the rookie team to be safe, and he was sent home right before the final against Adam on the season. Danny is on the Challengers team on the Ruins, and he doesn't last long there, as he was the fourth boot on the season, where Darrell beat him, though Danny did win a round, which some use as a reason as to why he's better than Tyri. At this point, it's par for the course, and we move on to his second to last season, Fresh Mates 2, where he was on the majority alliance, since Wes was on the cast as well. They had the majority in the first few votes, but then Wes and Evelyn got sloppy in their moves, and Evelyn was salty about her partnership to Danny in the last Fresh Meat, where they decided to sacrifice him mid-season. His final season had the same arc that his first season on the show did, with the Austin cast being hated, and he had to work with his ex-wife Melinda, where they did get booted second against Camilla and Eric. The thing with Danny is that he rarely made it far on the seasons, and he was often one of the first few out on the season, but he was rarely in a good spot in the cast that he was in, or in a strong alliance, and his elimination record is horrible. But at least he did better than the others below him, where he did make it far onto the season and mid-season a few times in comparison, but it's really not much in the grand scheme of things. At 16th is Davis Mallory, who competed on the Inferno 3, the Duel 2, and Rivals 1. I don't believe I will have much to say about Davis, since he was only on a few seasons, the minimum requirement to make it on this list since he only did 3 seasons. His first season was the Inferno 3, where he did win an elimination against Danny early on in the season, but it's Danny, and he made it far in the season, where he was booted right before the final against Derek. I don't recall him being one of the stronger people on The Good Guys, hence him being nominated twice. Unfortunately, his 2 following seasons were outright flops. On the Duel 2, he was quickly on the outs with the people on the outs. He was on the outs with people who were on the outs, and he was on the outs with the majority alliance, where he was booted on the 3rd elimination of the season against Evan, who was the person he called out. And then on his final season, he was paired with Tyri on Rivals 1, where they are the first men eliminated against Kenny and Wes, and the others knew that there would be easy bait for Kenny and Wes to beat, since Kenny and Wes were in elimination because they got last on that daily. Davis only did a few seasons, and he had 1 solid season and 2 really bad seasons, and he just doesn't compare to most of the people on this list, but he's higher than the other 3 because 1, he at least won an elimination, and 2, he made it close to the final, where most of the other ones didn't. At 15th is Brandon Nelson, who competed on Fresh Meats 2, Cutthroat, Rivals 1, Battle of the Seasons 2, Free Agents, All-Stars 4, and Battle of the Eras. We're going to the first person who has played on more recent seasons, and Brandon started on Fresh Meats 2, where he is paired up with Caitlin, who is a weak competitor, and they were sent into the 4th elimination, but because he drank the morning of, they were DQ'd from the season. His best season is the second season Cutthroat, but even when you look at it, the season isn't a good showing. He was on the outs of his red team since he was a newer player, causing him to go into elimination several times, where he beat Derek, JD, and Ty in eliminations, though 2 of them would prove to be somewhat decent in their later seasons, but he only won over Ty because the latter literally passed out, where Brandon was losing otherwise. He would eventually lose to Derek on the season, but his best season only caused him to be booted mid-season. After that season, he would not have a good or even somewhat notable season again, especially since he would not win an elimination again through the rest of his career as I am recording this. He was eliminated early on Rivals 2, where he and his partner Ty were sent home on the second guys elimination against Kenny and Wes, who were only in because they got last on the daily, and the two of them were not in the big group running the season. He was on the Fresh Meats team on Battle of the Seasons too, and they were seen as veterans, so they weren't going to last long, and he was eliminated third with Cara Maria against Chet and Sarah. He was also the only one from the Fresh Meats team who didn't win an elimination this season. And then on Free Agents, he didn't last long on that season either, as he lost to Zach on the third man's elimination, and he wasn't in the numbers or the alliances of that season either. We wouldn't see Brandon on a show again for another 9 years, where he was on All-Stars 4, where he was eliminated on the third male's elimination, close to the halfway point of the season due to all the quits that happened, where Cara Maria wanted revenge on him for voting her in the last round, and he lost in the eliminations anyway. And then he was the first out on Battle of the Eras due to being thrown in against Ryan and getting the one elimination out of the 4 that he wouldn't have won against Ryan on. Just looking at everything, Brandon rarely made it far on his seasons, or really ever made it far on his seasons, but has a few slight redeeming qualities that puts him above the others below him. Honestly, I probably could have put Davis above him, since at least he did well on one season, though his other 2 seasons were poor compared to Brandon, but Brandon has a better elimination record, and he wasn't eliminated too early on most of his seasons, but honestly, it's a coin flip, really. At 14th is Ryan Kehoe, who competed on Fresh Meat 1, The Gauntlet 3, The Island, The Duel 2, Fresh Meats 2, Battle of the Eras, All-Stars 2, and All-Stars 4. So we are finally moving on to someone who actually made it to a final, and compared to the person that I have above him, I could move him up a spot, and I might have done that by the time I record and edit this, and honestly I'm not the most sure about his spot and a few of the people that I have a bit above him. On the first season, Fresh Meat 1, he didn't last long on the season because he was paired with Melinda, and the house wanted Real World Austin out, where he was the second boot against Wes and Casey. On his second season, The Gauntlet 3, he did win an elimination against Derek during the mid-portion of the season and escaped going into several eliminations despite being on the losing rookies team throughout the season. And I don't recall if he had any solid alliances, but just from my memory, I do recall the veterans intentionally saving him during a few votes because they did see him as weaker. But he was taken out in the second to last male round against Nehemiah. On his next season, The Island, he kind of stayed out of the way from the drama and politics, but he was able to win an easy face-off against Coley and Johanna that the men wanted him to get due to being a man, so he definitely benefited from male privilege here. And he made it to his only final, though he ended up losing due to being on a boat with Jen, Paula, and Robin. Unfortunately for him, he found himself on the out of the Duel 2 since the strategy of laying back and using his social game to get far did not work here, as a large alliance ahead of the competitors stood together, and that caused him to be targeted right off the bat, winning the first elimination against Nick and losing to MJ in the following round, causing him to be a second boot. After his early boot, he went on to his final flagship season for a while on Fresh Meats 2, where he and Jen played a great floater game between the two sides of the house, and no one could really do anything about it, since both sides needed their votes. Ryan and Jen chose to side with Kenny when the numbers were gone on West's side, but he and Teresa went into the final elimination against Jen and Noor. If I remember correctly, I think both teams wanted to go in, where he and Teresa lost right before the final. It would be over a decade until Ryan returned to the show, and it was on All-Stars 2, where he was immediately on the out and booted in the second round against Cohutta. It didn't take him long for him to come back on All-Stars 4, where he formed some relationships with many people, where he only won a daily and was in the bottom group a lot of times, so he wasn't doing well competitively, but he was never in elimination, which I guess you could say is a positive coming from a negative, but due to its fearful gameplay, he was purged right before the final. He got a lucky elimination that favored her, which he won against Brandon on 40 in the first elimination, and pretty much wasn't targeted for the first half of the Battle of the Eras, to the chagrin of some of his Era 2 peers, only to get booted by Bananas right as the format switched mid-season. He at least made it to one final, or close to the final, a few times, unlike the people below him, but he also has his fair share of early boots, with a meh elimination record. And his highs really aren't that high when you think about it. At 13th is Chet Cannon, who competed on the Ruins, Cutthroat, Battle of the Seasons 2, and Free Agents. I am debating about moving him down a spot lower, and I could see myself being argued into doing such, or even moving him around a bit more. But I do think that his strength is better than Ryan's strengths, and his best seasons are better than Ryan's, and it could be argued that his best season is better than some of the others that are right above him. He was on the Challengers team on the Ruins and was chosen to go into elimination, where he ended up being the first boot after losing to Wes. His second season was Cutthroat, where he seemed like he was in an actual good position on the red team, despite him being a newer player, unlike Brandon, who was thrown in over and over and over again. But he was DQ'd mid-season, where he probably makes it very deep into the season had that not happened. Battle of the Seasons 2 is the season that showed a lot of his strengths, as he and Sarah won 2 early eliminations against Braden and Carmaria and Mackenzie and Preston, and they really led the Brooklyn team, as they won 2 of the later dailies and let the target get off them as the other teams in that majority alliance started infighting, where they got 3rd place due to Devon holding them back, where they could have won had she been booted earlier. He was sent into the first elimination on his final season Free Agents, and he quit his elimination against Frank due to an injury, where he was going to be booted anyways. So he has 2 first outs mid-season and a really good season, and I do think that a part of the issue with him is that he lacks focus on some of his bad seasons, but he was relatively inconsistent, which is why he is here. At 12th, I have Eric Banks, who competed on Fresh Meat 1, The Duel 1, The Gauntlet 3, The Duel 2, Cutthroat, Battle of the Seasons 2, and All Stars 1. Honestly, I am kind of shocked and somewhat feel away that he is this high on the list, which is only roughly around the mid portion of the list. But I am making this list based off of stats and context. And based on the stats, he doesn't fall enough to be a lower tier challenger from the Era 2 men, as he's never been booted too early, he's made it to a few finals, and he has a balanced elimination record, which is something I really can't say combined for the people who have below him. So he appeared with Katie on Fresh Meat 1, where they were booted mid-season against Kenny and Tina, after all the easy targets were booted. He made it relatively far on the Duel 1, though I don't think he was in the main alliance, but he did win a daily and took out Nehemiah in elimination, where weight was a factor and the rules of it were dumb. But he was booted at 5th against Evan. Of course, we have the Gauntlet 3, where he made it to the end because he was on the stacked veterans team, so they really went in, and during the few times that the veterans lost, they didn't want to have to go against him because of his size, but he single-handedly lost the veterans this season, which would affect him throughout the rest of his challenge career. No one wanted to take him anywhere near a final on the Duel 2 after his performance on his last season, but he was on complete outs, which is why he made it yet again to the mid-season portion, but he was taken out by Derek. He was thrown into a few eliminations on Cutthroat due to appearing as a weak link, and people still remembering his Gauntlet 3 performance. So he was thrown into elimination where he beat Vinny, but was taken out to the next round against Luke. And then there was his final flagship season where he was on the Fresh Meats team, who were on the outs, and he demolished Wes and Hallbrawl due to his size, and won against Danny and Melinda with Camilla, so he won 2 eliminations this season, but he quit on the 4th elimination with Camilla. And I think this, even outside of his Gauntlet 3 final performance, made him look horrible. Eric wanted redemption on All-Stars 1, where he knew his last flagship season left a bad taste in people's mouths, where he did win 2 dailies on the season and did win an elimination with Gisela against Kendall and Nehemiah, but he performed pretty poorly on the final. He could win some eliminations, though most of them are weight-based, and he's never been booted too early, but still relatively early enough, and he went to a few finals, where he performed poorly on both. I might be able to be convinced to move him down a bit lower, but for now, here he is. At 11th is Cohutta Grindstaff, who competed on The Island, The Ruins, Free Agents, Battle of the Bloodlines, and All Stars 2. So I initially had him at 10th for some reason, and when looking at a few of the people who were around him, he really didn't accomplish much during his time on the show, even over some of the people that are more inconsistent. And to be honest, I could probably be argued into putting him a bit lower. His first season was the island, and he really didn't do much on the season, where he wasn't on the side of the majority and was picked off a bit past the midway point of the season, where he lost the face-off and vote against Derek and Johnny. But he wasn't an endgamer on the season. The Ruined was a more impressive season for him, despite only making it through a bit past the halfway point of the season. He was seen as one of the starter players of the Challengers team, which is why he was safe for the first few rounds, but they started running out of numbers, so he was put into elimination on 3 consecutive rounds, taking out Wes and Cyrus, only to lose to Darrell. He wouldn't be on the show for several years, where he came back on Free Agent, which was easily his best season. He did win the first 2 dailies of the season, though one was a large team daily, and the other was more impressive, where he didn't win anything else throughout the season, and he made it close to the end game, but not close to the final at all, where he was eliminated by Leroy right after taking out Preston the round prior. On Battle of the Bloodlines, he and his cousin had the first daily thrown to them by some of the women, and they ended up getting booted in the following round once they were on teams, where he was eliminated by Thomas. He returned on All-Stars 2, and he won an early elimination against Ryan, but was pulled due to Casey being pregnant, though they had people who stayed when their partner was DQ'd in the season as well, where he could have made it very far without this. Cohutta can hold his own in eliminations, but the fact that he never really got close to a final or really have much of an alliance has me putting him here, though he's really an early boot as well. At 10th is Derek Chavez, who competed on Cutthroat, Battle of the Seasons 2, Rivals 2, All-Stars 2, All-Stars 4, and Battle of the Eras. I'm not all the way sold on the Derek stock yet, hence why I had him at number 11 for the longest time while making this list. So his first season was Cutthroat, where he was sent home first since his team saw him as the weakest and he lost to Brandon in a physical elimination. His second season was Battle of the Seasons 2, where the Cancun team was the second in command to the large alliance that was forming as they were tightly aligned with San Diego. And I think a decent amount of that also has to do with the fact that Zach and Jonay were showmancing one another. But they did win a few of those earlier dailies in the season, and he and Jonay went the entire season without seeing an elimination right up until the location change right before the final, where they were taken out by Ashley and Frank. He was on the next season paired with Rob, where they were on the outs immediately since they had no ties to the vet women, where they were thrown into the first 2 eliminations, beating Dunbar and Tyri, and then losing the next round to Knight and Preston. It would be 8 years before he returned to the franchise, where he was on All-Stars 2, where he probably shouldn't have been on due to the stuff that was happening in his real life, and he was eliminated first by Nehemiah. He would return on All-Stars 4 and shock people with his challenge performance, as he was one of the better ones, winning 4 dailies, though he was in the losing group arguably just as much, and never actually went into elimination, where he had to win the perch to get himself to the final. But his final performance really wasn't strong there, where he got 8th overall. His return to the flagship was on Battle of the Eras, where he avoided nomination throughout the entire season, mainly because the women decided to targets for the men up until the final male round before the final, where he did win against Corey to get to the final, and he got 2nd place throughout the final. Derek did grow as a competitor a lot throughout his last 2 seasons, but a part of me is still kind of worried about his inconsistency, since he's a very early out whenever he doesn't make it far, and he still has a pretty poor elimination record, as he only won 2 and lost 4. At 9th, I have Ty Ruff, who played on Cutthroat, Rivals 1, Battle of the Exes 1, and Rivals 2. I'm not the most sure in having him up this high, since he only has 1 finals appearance, but I do feel like his lows aren't as low as damn near everyone else below him on this list. His first season was Cutthroat, where everyone assumed that he was going to be one of the strongest people on the show, but he underperformed, especially in his elimination with Brandon, where he would have won but randomly passed out. After his mid-season boot on his first season, he came back on Rivals 1, where he was partnered with Brandon, but due to them being newer, weaker, and not having much ties, they were sent into the second male elimination, where they did lose to Kenny and Wes. The season that heavily redeemed him was Battle of the Exes 2, where he was partnered with Emily. This was a catch-22, since they didn't have any alliances or ties like that, hence them getting thrown into several eliminations and never winning any dailies in the season. But they won 3 eliminations against Leroy and Naomi, Abram and Carmaria, and Dunbar and Paula. Some solid names and some that aren't the best in that group. They did get to the final but got 3rd place, which is essentially last place in the final. And then his final season really wasn't notable, where he and Leroy would have been DQ'd mid-ish season had Zach not they would have been eliminated mid-season had Zach not DQ'd in their elimination, and they ended up being booed in the second to last male round against Jordan and Marlon. And I did forget that they won a daily in the season, so at least for that, good for them, we comes to that. Just a meh and a solid enough, slightly average, average competitor and career. At 8th is Tyler Duckworth, who competed on the Duo 1, the Gauntlet 3, Cutthroat, Rivals 1, All-Stars 2, and All-Stars 3. He is another person that is relatively tough to talk about, since he really only had 2 good seasons, and his career overall is just very mixed. On his first season, the Duo 1, he was targeted due to being a newbie, and instead of potentially changing things up, he chose and beat Bananas as his opponent, only for him to be thrown into the next elimination and is beaten by Derek, becoming the second male boot. The same pattern essentially continues on the Gauntlet 3, where the vets, mainly Johnny, wanted to target him, and Tyler caused a bunch of drama during his second elimination, where he was taken out by Frank. We wouldn't see him for a few years and a few seasons, where he did get into much better shape and got into a majority alliance on his red team, which included Tori, Brad, Dunbar, and Paula. He was able to be one of the better competitors on his red team, which did shock a lot of people, and was able to outlast Bananas in the CT heavy hitter and took out Derek. But he was in the bottom of his alliance, which is why he was thrown into the last 2 eliminations, but he got his first win here. On the next season, Rivals 1, of course he was paired with Bananas, and they were arguably the strongest male team, as they won 3 dailies and didn't go into elimination until the final one, where they beat, or had it thrown to them, Adam and CT, leading to Tyler's second consecutive win. I will say that even on his better seasons, he wasn't the best politically, as he was thrown in twice at the end, showing that he was the 3rd man on Cutthroat and was in the majority alliance solely due to Bananas on Rivals 1. Tyler wouldn't return to the franchise for another decade, where he appeared on All-Stars 2, winning a daily, though it was a large team one, and made it halfway through that season before he was taken out by Letirian. And then he came back for the 3rd season a few months later on All-Stars 3, where he was the first boot, losing to Cyrus, which isn't the best look. Ultimately, Tyler is very inconsistent, where he only has 2 good seasons, 3 bad seasons, and 1 mess season. I could probably throw him down lower if I talk longer, and his elimination record is very split. Tyler has higher highs than some of the others, but he's extremely inconsistent, and I can't just justify him being any higher on this list. At 7th, I have Dunbar Merrill, who competed on The Island, The Duel 2, The Ruins, Cutthroat, Battle of the Exes 2, and Rivals 2. Honestly, I am pretty shocked that he is this high on the list, and I can see some people mentioning that he should be lower, but looking at his seasons and his track record, he is more consistent than some of the others who may have had some higher highs, but they also have lower lows, though he doesn't have the highest highs himself. Look at this, you see a lot of pink and greens, which I can't say for really anyone that's below him. So his first season was The Island, where he definitely used the misogyny in the season to get in good with Johnny and Kenny, which almost worked, since they wanted him to be on their boat for the final for most of the season. He was given a key by Abram, which is why a lot of people talked about why he didn't deserve to be on a final boat, and his own team sandbagged him by getting Evelyn to take his key right before the final, eliminating him. He was on the Duel 2, where all of his allies from last season weren't on the season, with the exception of Paula, who blew up her spot to save him, getting booted at around the 60 to 70-ish% mark of the season. So that was kind of just a meh season for him, losing to MJ. On the Ruins, he was on the Challengers team, which consistently lost the dailies and their players, and I'm assuming that his attachment to some of the JEK people was why he lasted so long on the season, and he didn't go in until he had to, as he was the last male on his team, and being the last man booted right before the final to Johnny. Clutchthroat is the next season, though he is considered one of the weaker winners ever. He was the 3rd person in the alliance with Brad and Tori on the red team. He was mid in dailies, but he did win an elimination against Dan in the season, which is rare for him to win an elimination win. And the fact that he doesn't do well in eliminations is definitely a dog against him overall. But it cost him to win the season. Paula would be his partner on Battle of the X's 1, where they won a daily and they were kind of middle of the road performance-wise. They did win an elimination against Anissa and Rachel, and then lost in the second to last round to Emily and Ty, though that's partially due to CT and DM's poor politics. And then his final season had him paired up with Tyri, where he was over it, and they lost against Derek and Rob on the first elimination on Rivals 2, which is a poor ending. I will say that his elimination record is very poor, and he didn't win many dailies, but he almost always makes it to the end game on his seasons, and he only really has one bad season, which is why I have him here, though he hasn't done much notable overall. At 6th is MJ Garrett, who competed on the Gauntlet 2, the Gauntlet 3, the Duel 2, All-Stars 2, and All-Stars 3. So he's the first... Actually, no, that's a lie. I thought he was going to be the first two-time champ on this list, but Tyler's further down below. Anyways, I do think that his trajectory is not the easiest to grasp, despite him having a relatively good track record. His first season is the Gauntlet 2, where, like I mentioned in the past, it's kind of hard to track things due to the captain's twist on the season, him not being a captain, and with the rookie team, there wasn't any politics whatsoever, as he was actively discouraged. He was never sent into elimination, showing that he wasn't bad enough for the captain to want to take him out, and his team won the season, though it was janky, as some of them didn't even play in the final. His second season was the Gauntlet 3, where he didn't last very long in the season, and he came in after a few rounds to replace Tyri, and was taken out by Frank a few rounds after his entrance. Looking at his flagship seasons, the Duel 2 is probably his most impressive, since despite not being in the Alliance controlling things, he did make it to the end game of the season, winning 2 eliminations against Ryan and Dunbar, but those names aren't the best, and losing in the second last male elimination against Brad. It would take him over a decade for him to reappear in the franchise on All-Stars 2, where he kind of sided with the Brad and Darrell side of the house and got close to Janae, who would eventually be his partner in the gang, where they won a daily and avoided going into elimination, causing them to win the season, no matter how controversial their performance in the final is. He came in with a target on his back on All-Stars 3 after winning, where he was in the authority a few times, and was able to take out Cyrus before losing against Derek right before the endgame on the season. I think the thing with MJ is that his resume isn't exciting. He can hold his own in eliminations, but doesn't have a good elimination record. He hasn't won many dailies, and despite being a 2-time champion, some of those wins aren't exciting. But he really has a poor season, and the only one that kind of fits this is the Gauntlet 3. He's relatively consistent and has won in 2 different formats and eras, as he won a big team season and a pair season. He just doesn't have the highs of the Era 2 greats. At 5th is Nehemiah Clark, who competed on the Duel 1, the Gauntlets 3, the Duel 2, Rivals 1, Battle of the Eras, All-Stars 1, All-Stars 2, and All-Stars 3. Nehemiah is the epitome of someone who fits the good but not great catchphrase and line, but in reference to the challenge, especially regarding the Era 2 men. His first season was the Duel 1, where he was not in the majority alliance at all, and because he was a newbie, he had some work cut out for him. He's the only person who ever beat Kenny in an elimination, though there's that weird Ascender elimination if I'm remembering it correctly. His association with Beth didn't do him any favors, but he was booted mid-season against Eric, as his underdog alliance with himself, Wes, Anissa, Svetlana, and Beth never really took off. He would be on the rookie team on the Gauntlet 3, where he was a part of the Austin alliance that controlled over the rookies team, and he was seen as one of the strongest men on the team, which is why the veterans threw him into quite a few eliminations, where he ended up taking out Alex and Ryan throughout the season, leading to him winning the season, even though it was due to Eric screwing up in the final for the veterans team. Nehemiah's following seasons on the flagship were relatively disappointing, where he came in as an alternate on the Duel 2 after CT and Adams' fight, and he went home fourth against Evan on the season, where he wasn't in the main alliance at all, and he called out Evan as his opponent to try to change things up, but it clearly failed. And then on Rivals 1, he was partnered with Evan, which should have ensured him to make it to the end, with both of them being attached to the sides of the house that were forced to align in the season. But Evan supposedly needed to go home to go back to school, and there's a plan for them to be the ones to take out CT and Adam, where that ended up failing in the middle of the season. It wouldn't be for another decade where Nehemiah was given another opportunity to return to the show, and if anyone benefited from All Stars exponentially, especially with the men, it was Nehemiah. He played on the first season where he won an elimination against Tech early on and winning a few of the early dailies in the season, but was booted right before the final with Kendall against Gisela and Eric yet again. It wouldn't take Nehemiah long to return, as he came back a few months later on All Stars 2, leading the Kingdom's Palace Alliance, which helped orchestrate the move to boot Derek early on, won 2 dailies, though one of them was a large team season, and winning 2 eliminations in the season, where he and Melinda would end up getting 3rd place overall. Obviously, he aligned with Wes on All-Stars 3, and he played a bit more under the radar this season compared to last season, which did end up working for him, as he made it all the way to the final elimination without being nominated, though he took out Derek in a pole wrestle, which was Derek's specialty, but he got 3rd yet again in the final. He had his grand, or supposedly grand, return to the flagship show on Battle of the Eras, where he really wasn't the most notable in any way, but he beat CT in an elimination and was taken out in a purge roughly 2/3 throughout the season. It wasn't a bad season, but it wasn't really a good season either. It was kind of just meh, decent at best. But he really didn't have many allies in the season, so you could say that was impressive that he lasted that long. So, he has made it to a few finals, has a really great elimination record while taking out some big names, and he has really been booted early, but his solo win is weak, which he has acknowledged, and he doesn't have some of the same highs as the 4 that are above him, but he's definitely an upper tier player, especially compared to everyone else on Era 2. At 4th, I have Kenny Santucci, who competed on Fresh Meat 1, the Duel 1, the Inferno 3, the Gauntlet 3, the Island, the Ruins, Fresh Meat 2, and Rivals 1. Obviously, just from looking at his track record regarding the seasons he has done, you see a lot of greens, indicating that on most of his seasons he made it to the final. Technically, it's all but 1, which is very impressive. On his first season, Fresh Meat 1, he was paired with Tina, and they were very low-key in the beginning, though in the second half, they won 2 XLs against Katie and Eric and Thea and Chanda while winning the final daily, causing them to get 2nd overall in the season. His worst season was the Duel 1, where it was the only season that he was booted before the final, but he still won a daily here, though I think it was thrown to him, and he was booted relatively early on in the season against Nehemiah, where I think he was the 3rd man eliminated, if I'm remembering it correctly. He was placed on the Badasses team on the Inferno 3, where he was able to avoid elimination throughout the entire season and won the last 2 daily lifesavers, which brought him to the final and gave him his first win. The Gauntlet 3 was kind of the start of the big alliance that would kind of take over the rest of Era 2 would form, and the thing that he was kind of be known for, where he was a part of the Trim the Fat strategy, but got less of the flack on the dominant veteran team compared to some of his allies, and never went into elimination. So you could say that his social work was in effect here, where Eric caused them to lose, causing him to lack a win that he probably would have otherwise gotten. Overall, it's a pretty solid, but not the most notable showing regarding the first half of his career. I feel like his rep was mainly remembered, or is mainly remembered, for his second run on the show, though a lot of it was filled with misogyny, and it couldn't have been any more clear on the island. Despite that, he wasn't a target like Bananas was, showing his social prowess in comparison to the latter, and went his key to the final in the first vote against Tanya, and it was never taken, unlike Bananas, and he was able to get his allies to the end, where he won by making a deal with Evelyn so they could all win together, and to also have Johnny's key not being taken yet again, and that's how he got his second win. On the champions team, on the Ruins, they won most of the dailies of the season, and he was able to help not only get himself, but his allies to the end as they controlled the votes and were able to keep Casey on the weaker team to keep them weak, and never went into elimination, where he got his third and final win. Kenny had his back against the wall, which is a rare thing for him on Fresh Meats 2, where he didn't have the numbers entering the season, and he lost allies in Sarah and Paula early on in the season. But he and Laura had to win, win, win. And when they and or Jillian and Pete won several days throughout the season, it ended up causing Wes's alliance to fall apart. And they picked up Wes's former allies, causing them to make it to the final, where Kenny and Laura got second place. And this is the season where he won a lot of the dailies and eliminations that fit in his record, where he was mainly political and social beforehand. So you can kind of give a lot of credit to Laurel there as well. And then on his final season, Rivals 1 had the two alliances over the last few seasons aligned together due to the format, but he and Wes had to see two eliminations due to getting last in those dailies and winning against Davis and Tyree and Brendan and Ty, not strong names at all. And they won day 1 of the final, but it didn't lead to a big advantage on day 2, causing them to get second overall. Kenny's record of going into 7 out of 8 of the finals that he did during the season that he played, where most, if not anyone, will not and do not have that record, and he won 3 of those seasons. Him only being eliminated once really is a testament to his social and political game, and he could hold his own competitively when he needed to be. One thing that does hold him back, in my opinion, is that he never competed on an individual season. Most of his seasons are team seasons, but he did do well in paired seasons as well. And all of his seasons were in a 5-year time span, where his last season was 14 years ago as I am recording this. It would have been somewhat interesting to have seen how he could have adapted outside of this era, entering Era 3 and potentially Era 4. But due to his own actions, we will never get that. And I just feel like the top 3 were a bit more diverse in comparison. The bronze prize of 3rd place goes to Evan Starkman, who competed on Fresh Meat 1, The Duel 1, The Gauntlet 3, The Duel 2, The Ruins, and Rivals 1. It is interesting looking at Evan and Kenny, where a lot of people compare them since they did their seasons for the same length of time. His first season was obviously Fresh Meat 1, where he was paired with Coral, where they won 5 out of the first 6 dailies, but ended up getting DQ'd due to both of their injuries roughly past the mid-season, or the mid-portion of the season, where they probably would have made it to the end game had that not happened. He came into the Duel 1 aligned with CT, Brad, and Derek as the top men of the season, and he continued his trend of winning several dailies. And he won 6 of them throughout the season and held his own on an individual season, but was tricked by Wes into going into elimination against CT, where he was taken out in the second to last man's round of the season. He came on to the Gauntlet 3 to be placed on the veterans team, where he was seen as the leader of the team. With this being the cast that was heavily Era 2 people, he and others made it very clear that a new generation is running the show and that the Era 1 women, including his former partner in Coral, needed to go, and he got some of the backlash of that in the season. He was yet again one of the best men on the season, where he did take out Bananas in an early elimination, but his refusal to handle it caused him to lose what would have been his first win. He came back on the second individual season, The Duel 2, and aligned with the likes of Mark, Brad, Landon, Rachel, Brittany, and DM Tori 2, where they ran this season. Despite that, he was caught into 3 eliminations due to people in the minority, i.e. Nehemiah, Davis, and Derek, not liking him compared to his allies. So it says a lot about his social game. And he was kind of at the bottom of that alliance, which he didn't really realize. But he did win 3 eliminations and won 2 dailies in the season. Evan didn't get his first win here, though you could put somewhat of an asterisk on it because the finalists scripted his win due to the Canadians' prize money not being taxed, with them splitting it, meaning that they would all get more if a Canadian won it. There are some moments of him being a bit sloppy, which we saw in Paula on The Duel 2, where her voting Dunbar in that chain caused him to kind of be put on the out of his alliance, and then he had to make up for it by kind of abandoning her. And Veronica on the ruins where they were in a showmance, and she ended up flipping the vote, causing Ibis to go in when it was supposed to be her, but he would be one of the strongest men on the champions team and ran it politically with Kenny and their other allies, where he got his second win here. His final season, Rivals 1, wasn't the most impressive, since he agreed to a plan to face CT and Adam in an elimination with Nehemiah, where if he leaves early, he gets to go to school, or he can take out a threat for his friends to help them win. And apparently he wasn't really into the season and was starting to lose motivation for the show anyways, but it caused him to be booted mid-season. We have seen him play and have success on a pair, large team, and individual seasons, unlike Kenny, which is why I put him higher, though I do think that he is socially weaker, and I don't think he would have adapted as well in comparison had the both of them continued in the season with Era 3 and kind of Era 4, but his strengths in physicality and leadership and track record overall is just too good to ignore. He also only did 6 seasons within a 5-year time frame, so the lack of longevity could only cause me to put him so high compared to some of the others. The bronze prize of second place goes to Wes Bergmann, who competed on Fresh Meat 1, The Duel 1, The Ruins, Fresh Meat 2, Rivals 1, Battle of the Exes 1, Battle of the Seasons 2, Rivals 2, Battle of the Exes 2, Rivals 3, War of the Worlds 1, War of the Worlds 2, Total Madness, Double Agents, All-Stars 3, World Championship, and USA 2. Out of all the people who are seen as the GOATs of the show, especially when it comes to the men, I do think he's the most inconsistent, but it will be interesting how I rank people from all of the different eras when I eventually get there. His first season was Fresh Meat 1, where he was a target with his partner Casey due to the real world season that he came from, and they had to win 5 eliminations throughout the season, though they really had to cheat this excel by packing less in their luggages, so the record isn't as impressive as it is on paper. And after a deal or two with Kenny and Tina, he got 3rd place in the season. He was on the outs on the Duel 1 yet again, as the majority alliance did not include him, but he did try to make an underdog alliance with Nehemiah, Beth, Svetlana, and Anissa, but it never really took off. He was able to get Evan to throw himself into elimination against CT, which ended up failing. He won a few dailies later on in the season, and he was able to win his first season on an individual season, though it was due to the soccer task earlier on in the final, counting a lot for him. He retired for a few seasons, but came back mainly to cause conflict on the ruins, where the entire house was targeting himself, his girlfriend Kellyanne, and his ally Evelyn, causing him to be thrown into 3 eliminations, winning against Chet and Nick, not the strongest names, but losing to Cohutta mid-season, which also isn't the strongest name. On Fresh Meats 2, he and Evan had the numbers for the first third or so of the season, but he couldn't get Kenny and Laura out. But due to sacrificing some of his allies mid-season, especially Danny, for self-preservation and cockiness, and with Kenny and Laurel continuing to win dailies, his allies flipped on him, and Wes and Mandy were taken out close to the end game against his ally, Evelyn and Luke. Due to the format of Rivals 1, and with him being paired with Kenny, they had the numbers from both of their alliances being forced to work together, and due to this, he and Kenny were given weaker opponents to face in elimination, where they lost the dailies, beating Davis and Harry and Brennan and Ty, and they were able to get to the end of the season with their alliance, and the lead on day 1 essentially went away on day 2, causing them to lose. He played horribly on Battle of the Exes 1, no way around it. He targeted Johnny and Camilla while they were in power, causing them to be thrown into eliminations right off the bat with Mandy, where they beat rookies Nate and Priscilla, and he single-handedly caused them to lose to Leroy and Naomi, being the second boots. His bad luck, or just bad performances, continued on Battle of the Seasons 2, where Austin was targeted yet again, where he and Lacey lost to Eric and Carmaria in a hall brawl on the first elimination of the season. He did recover on Rivals 2, where he was partnered with CT, and they won several dailies throughout the season, and avoided going into elimination due to their stronger relationships with the woman, which was the twist of the season, causing him to get his second win. Battle of the Exes 2 is arguably his strongest season politically, where he and Teresa had deals with several of the strong pairs in the house, and they won a good amount of dailies throughout the season, convincing Leroy to take a shot at Wes's own close ally in Zach, and then getting rid of Bananas and Nanny at the opportune time. At the same time, the Exile twist and his overconfidence pissing people off like Jordan caused him to be booted right before the final, losing to Leroy and Naya. It didn't seem like he was fully there on Rivals 3, where he and Nanny were on the outs throughout the season, but they still made it deep into the season, though they had to win some eliminations to get there, winning against Jamie and Kellyanne and Nate and Christina, losing to Daria and Nicole soon before the final, which isn't the best luck. Wes took another break and came back on War of the Worlds 1 after a few years and seasons, where he took out Bananas right away and tried to take out the UK alliance. Some of them were booted, but he wasn't as successful as he wanted to. Wes did win a good amount of the dailies that got him into a lot of tribunals, and got third overall throughout the season out of 8, on a final where only one person, no matter the gender, wins. Or gender discounted wins. Despite the great comeback season, he would flame out on the rest of his flagship seasons as I'm recording this, being blindsided to be taken out by Bear in the second male elimination on War of the Worlds 2, volunteering mid-season to get his skull against Bananas, where he lost on Total Madness, where there were several other male eliminations after this for him to get his skull. And then getting taken out or throwing the elimination to Devin on the second male elimination on Double Agents. The inconsistency continued on the spin-offs, not including Champs vs. Stars, since they don't include those stats for the show overall, where he did have a good season on All-Stars 3, though he only went into the Authority once and went into elimination against Yes, where he won. World Championship was not a good showing for him, where he and Zara did win a daily, but they were taken out relatively early against Casey and Ben. And then he had an okay season on USA 2, getting close enough to the end game where he was taken out by Chris. Wes has managed to have success in every single format of the show throughout many different years and decades as well. His highs are highs and his lows are kind of low, where he has a decent amount of good seasons, a decent amount of mess seasons, and a handful of bad seasons. And that is why he isn't at number 1 for the Era 2 men. And unshockingly to absolutely no one, at number 1 for the Era 2 men is Johnny Devenezio, who competed on the Duel 1, the Inferno 3, the Gauntlet 3, the Island, the Ruins, Cutthroat, Rivals 1, Battle of the Exes 1, Rivals 2, Free Agents, Battle of the Exes 2, Final Bloodlines. I skipped around there. I'm tired. Rivals 3, Invasion of the Champions, Dirty 30, Vendettas, Final Reckoning, War of the Worlds 1, War of the Worlds 2, Total Madness, Ride or Die, World Championship, USA 2, and Battle of the Eras. I'm not going to be going into detail with all of these seasons since there's like 25 of them and going over all the dailies he won and all the eliminations he won. I am going to try my best to not waste too much time on this since I just don't have the energy for all this right now. And I feel like this for every challenger who's done a bunch of seasons, like over 10, but it's especially apparent with him. So he was the first boot on the Duel 1 since he received the rookie treatment and Tyler chose to go against him, which he lost. He was put on the Good Guys team, which is laughable now, on the Inferno 3, where there was some promise in his potential as a game player, as he avoided elimination all season and won 2 lifesavers in the season, but he ended up losing the season. Johnny's bad run would continue on the Gauntlet 3, where during the one time that the veterans lost early on in the season on a guy's day, Evan plotted for his demise, where Johnny warned them that Eric was going to be a bigger liability, but they didn't listen to him. Ultimately, he became the obnoxious villain that we know him as currently on the island, where he got in good with Kenny and helped run the politics of the season with the mass misogyny, though he almost got booted second, despite Abram wanting to get voted out, and his back and forth with Evelyn almost caused him to lose the season, but he got his first win here, mainly with Kenny and Derek cleaning up his mess and begging Evelyn to not take his key in the final. He would fully become a part of JEK with Evan and Kenny, and Derek is also included there on the ruins. But he was thrown into an elimination against Dunbar over any of them, showing his pecking order, and I believe this was during the last male elimination of the season, but he did win his second season here. Clutchthroat really wasn't a notable season for him, where his team kept on losing people and they weren't really that good in the dailies, but he did get booted in the second to last round before the final against his rival Tyler via Mercenary CT. Johnny and Tyler were arguably the best team on Rivals 1 as they were a part of the Big Alliance. They won 3 dailies in the season and won the final elimination against CT and Adam, though some may claim that it was thrown to them, where he got his third win here. Kenny and Evan not being on the show anymore didn't slow Bananas down, as he had a strong alliance with Mark on the next season, and Leroy, while the latter was still there. He won several dailies with his partner Camilla and had an elimination thrown to him by Mark in the final round, where he and Camilla won the season. He has a pretty good season with Rivals 2, as he was paired with Frank, someone who he never interacted with outside of Twitter, where they actually got along and worked together very well, avoiding elimination all season and won a few dailies, but they got second in the season. Free Agent is probably his most impressive win, since it was an individual season where he won several dailies in several different formats and won several eliminations, though against the not impressive Isaac, but impressive big names in Jordan and CT, ultimately winning the season. His strike spell would somewhat start roughly around the Battle of the Exes 2, where Wes had Leroy and Nia send him and Nani home mid-season, though they ended up winning like 4 exile eliminations, if I'm remembering it correctly, causing them to come back late in the season, only to be taken out by Leroy and Nia right before the final. He and his cousin Vince caused some mess with Cara Maria's alliance on Battle of the Bloodlines, but they were taken out in the second to last round before the final. Ultimately, he and Sarah had a very easy cast to work with on the season to steamroll, as they won several dailies and won the final elimination against Dario and Nicole, where they of course win the season, and his choice against Sarah caused him to be cursed. Johnny's next several seasons wouldn't be good for him, as he was out second on Invasion of the Champions. He was taken out in the third purge on Dirty 30, and despite winning several dailies on Vendettas and Final Reckoning, he cannot get to the final on either season, where he was taken out by Devin a bit past the midway point of the season, and he and Tony lost the final elimination to Polly and Natalie right before the final on that season. And then he had 2 seasons right afterwards where he went home very early on, which isn't like him at all, as the War of the World seasons were not friendly to him, going out in the second elimination against Zach and Zahida on War of the Worlds 1, where he got mad that Zach didn't throw the elimination to him, and a sloppy political play with encouraging Laura and Josh to go after Wes, and then throwing the next daily to get Carmaria sent in, caused him to go home early by Polly on War of the Worlds 2 as well, where he sent Theo in to take Bananas out. Bananas did go on to win Total Madness, breaking the curse where he did win a few dailies and took out Wes to get his skull. Ride or Dice was an impressive enough season for him, winning a few eliminations, and the daily wins that are attached to his record here were mainly team wins, like large team wins, but they got second. He and Nani got second in the season. World Championship really wasn't a notable season for him, in my opinion, and then he got third on both USA 2 and Battle of the Eras, winning a few eliminations in each of them. So despite his last winning taking place 5 years ago as I'm recording this, Bananas can still do well on the show, making it to the final on most of the seasons that he has done recently. He has thrived in every single format. He is the person who has won the most seasons, and he has adapted with the times where many of his allies had to be taken off the show or were taken off the show, and he had to find new allies. He's seen as the king of the challenge for a reason, and I am too tired to talk about anything else, so I'm just going to wrap it up here. Okay, so this is my ranking of the Era 2 men who has done at least 3 seasons. Entering this, I knew the top bulk and I knew the bottom bulk, but it was the middle that I was having trouble with. And honestly, the people in the middle I could still rearrange if I really talk myself more or let myself go into certain ledgers, as I am not the most sure about them. Compared to the Era 1 men, there weren't a whole lot of things holding them back regarding a bunch of format issues or a bunch of jankiness, and the seasons aren't too old, but I did notice that a lot of the Era 2 people were kind of insular. Many of them haven't played recently whatsoever, so that was kind of hard to look at, and a lot of them didn't make grand returns on All Stars compared to a lot of the Era 1 people, so I found that to be an interesting development. Yeah, but some of the best are here, but you could also say that some of the worst are also here, and you can't blame it on the poor formats like you could for some of the Era 1 people who didn't really do that well. Anyways, I am halfway done ranking the challengers who have done at least 3 seasons. I'm assuming Era 3 and Era 4 are going to be easier because those seasons, for the most part, are pair and dual seasons, and there aren't that many people from those two eras that have done at least 3 or more seasons. So, yeah, thank you all for following me on this journey, and I'll be back with more soon. Take care.